Final Fantasy. As well as providing your dad's favourite video game joke that he will repeat each and every time, it's one of the biggest video game IPs of all time, with well over 100 games to its name. Just like how you don't ask a woman her age or me to shut up about F-Zero, you don't ask a Final Fantasy fan how many games there are in total. Get the number right and Sakaguchi will teleport to your location with 10,000 unsold VHS copies of The Spirits Within to give to you. I do love that movie, I do. With so many games though, you can bet some Final Fantasy games have slipped through the cracks over the years. Let's take a look at just some of them with today's tale. Yeah, you know you've made it when your mascot character is popular enough to get their own spin-off game, and Final Fantasy's Chocobos have managed to nab themselves over a dozen dedicated games. Somehow? But, you know, birds together strong, but 12? Final Fantasy Fables Chocobo Tales in particular stands out for a few reasons. Released in 2006, this DS spin-off was developed by hand, marking the first of many projects they'd have a hand in for Square Enix. Rather than craft a singular, focused experience, Chocobo Tales winds up being a minigame compilation dressed up as an adventure game. It's not Chocobo WarioWare, because that'd be sick, but it is kinda neat still. You play as a Chocobo trying to save their friends from an evil book, and in the process, explore a variety of classic fairy tales with a Final Fantasy themed twist. Chocobo Tales also throws in a whole card-based battle system, because it is Final Fantasy. You'll collect a variety of cards through the minigames during the adventure, and then assemble together a 15-card deck for the game's boss fights. Both the minigames and these card duels can also be played in multiplayer, which adds some longevity. It's all pretty simple stuff really, but Chocobo Tales is still well made and well fun. It's a light-hearted affair, worth checking out whenever you need a break from the darker mainline Final Fantasy titles, my lord. My dark lord. The mid-2000s, MySpace, Franz Ferdinand, not that one, and the beginning of the digital gaming age on consoles. Even the Wii, which was much more physical focused due to a lack of storage space, offered a variety of games on the Wii Shop channel. Hoping to capitalise on WiiWare to grab players' attention, Square Enix released a Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles spin-off at the service's launch, and it was called My Life as a King. This digital curio is perhaps one of the stranger entries in the franchise, as it's a simple city-building game where players rebuild a fallen kingdom. The mechanics you'd expect from the genre are here, such as placing buildings, researching items, and keeping citizen morale up. A few years later, Square would follow up on this game with My Life as a Dark Lord, a sequel of sorts that once again completely shifts the genre. God is the city builder sim in favour of a tower defence game, of all things. Not only that, but the game also features a bit of a different take on the genre, with all stages being set within the towers themselves, meaning that gameplay revolves around placing all manner of traps and obstacles within the towers to stop the enemies. And yeah, neither of these games will be winning any award for depth, but they're still prime examples of an era where major game companies still bothered to be experimental and a bit weird. And with the death of the Wii Shop channel, today's gamers will grow up without ever knowing that there was a Final Fantasy game that starred a gothic Lolita. So yep, take that trivia and don't repeat it in a public space, okay? Now, here's a really weird one, and such a forgotten Final Fantasy game that basically no footage of it exists, really. If you thought, right, Final Fantasy or The Bravest was shallow, then you haven't seen Voice Fantasy. Basically nobody has actually. Released exclusively for iOS devices in 2010, Voice Fantasy lived and died on its sole gimmick. Using a sample recording of your voice, the game would then generate a character with predetermined stats. From there, the game takes your characters into turn-based battles, emphasis on the game and not the player. You see, Voice Fantasy's battles all play out automatically, and the only thing you as a player can do is sit back and watch as your characters throw themselves at the same tiny pool of enemies over and over again. Your characters can't even level up, and there's no exploration, towns, or even any meaningful gameplay outside of the auto battles. And despite the name, virtually nothing in Voice Fantasy evokes the staples associated with the Final Fantasy franchise. At its MSRP of $2.99, we still tell you to avoid it, but Square Enix has long since delisted the game back in 2016. Fortunately, our next entry is thankfully at least a bit more legendary than this one. Square's very first million seller was never meant to be a Final Fantasy game in the first place. Similar to how Nintendo dressed up Doki Doki Panic as Super Mario Bros. 2 for Western audiences, Square rebranded Macrae Toshi Saga as the Final Fantasy Legend in the West. The Final Fantasy Legend stars a group of characters created by the player as they scale a mystical tower in hopes of reaching paradise. As the first game in the Saga series, the Final Fantasy Legend features a variety of mechanics and quirks that would distinguish it from Final Fantasy and would later define the general style of the Saga franchise. For starters, there are 3 playable races: humans, mutants, and monsters, each with big differences in how they progress. Humans' stats improve by consuming stat-boosting items, mutant stats randomly increase after fights, and monsters change subclasses by eating meat dropped by enemies. While the Final Fantasy Legend would spawn 2 more successors with that name, the Saga franchise would stand on its own after that point, with the PS1 Saga Frontier being the first to retain its original title in the West. Though not too many will feel the need to revisit the slightly dated Final Fantasy Legend games, the Saga series as a whole has garnered a dedicated cult following of fans who appreciate how wildly different the series is from your average JRPG. It's definitely worth exploring if you haven't. Sometimes the success of a game leads to the creation of a whole new subgenre, and then others begin to follow in those footsteps. See PUBG somehow resulting in a Pac-Man Battle Royale? In Square Enix's case, Final Fantasy Explorers was their take on the Monster Hunter concept. This 2016 3DS spin-off features the mission-based structure and multiplayer support that's become a standard of the hunting genre, and of course, there's tons of gear to get your hands on, with the game's core loop being based around getting stronger and stronger and stronger through this gear, and then getting more gear, and then getting stronger, and so on. Do that for a few dozen hours, and it's a pretty nice, fun way of forgetting that you're barely even a fart in the wind in the galaxy. Mortality. This being a Final Fantasy game, though, there's of course going to be some twists that incorporate the series staples. While the story is more of an excuse to go around bashing monsters instead of a grand epic, Explorers still features classic Final Fantasy jobs, and to ratchet up the customization even further, abilities can be mixed and matched between different classes. To top it all off, the trance mechanic lets players temporarily transform into classic Final Fantasy heroes, lending the game some star power. As promising as this all might seem, Final Fantasy Explorers unfortunately failed to leave a lasting mark on the series' history, with critics feeling that the game's repetitive nature and tedious quests hold back the otherwise really solid combat. Perhaps a Switch or Switch 2 remaster with some quality of life additions might shine a light on this game, especially seeing as the subgenre is more popular than ever. We almost could have seen a 3D Final Fantasy V remake in the vein of the DS remakes of Final Fantasy 3 and 4. Instead, producer Tomoya Asano decided that developer Matrix Software were far too talented to simply put out another remake, and set about creating a new, original game instead. Released in October 2009 in Japan and October 2010 for the West, Final Fantasy The Four Heroes of Light is a classic-styled, turn-based RPG that draws from Final Fantasy 3 and 5 for its job system and Final Fantasy 4 for its storytelling. The plot treads well-worn ground, and you can guess what it involves since it's right there in the title. 4 teenage heroes have to join together and save the world from darkness. Nothing too crazy there. The job system, meanwhile, is rechristened the Crown system, as your characters' classes are all determined by what headgear they're wearing. Crowns come with a set of skills and stats, though magic can be used by any job. Where the Four Heroes of Light gets a little weird is in its other gameplay mechanics. Unlike most other turn-based RPGs on the planet, your characters can't pick their targets in battle. Physical attacks always aim for the enemy furthest to the left and front, while magic always aims for enemies furthest to the right and back. It's a bit of an odd one, but thanks to this and other design choices such as a very small inventory per character, the Four Heroes of Light's reception ended up being far more mixed. It's quite telling that the game's spiritual successor, the Bravely Default series, would discard many of these idiosyncrasies for something far more accessible. Right, unvault your iPod Nano, load it up with Papa Roach and Mushroom Head. It's time to talk about a real game. After the massive success of Final Fantasy X-2, Square became far more receptive to the idea of expanding on existing entries, and what better way to start doing that than with the iconic Final Fantasy VII. The compilation of Final Fantasy VII has become a massive multimedia franchise that's still going pretty strong to this day, and you could probably do a video just on that alone. These spin-offs have all collectively expanded upon the world and characters of Final Fantasy VII in a variety of ways, but one particular entry stands out for being rather unusual. The physical manifestation of LimeWire, Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII is a third-person shooter with some RPG elements sprinkled in, and it's pretty dang weird and a bit bad, but also maybe a bit good. Slightly. Set 3 years after Final Fantasy VII, Dirge of Cerberus shifts the focus to Vincent Valentine and an organisation known as Deepground. The switch up towards gunplay also mean that Dirge of Cerberus streamlines key mechanics. For starters, Vincent's gear consists solely of his gun, which can be customised as you progress. The overall structure is also as linear as you'd expect from a shooter, without much room for exploration. Unfortunately, despite attempts to polish the game for the Western release, which included balance changes and the removal of an online multiplayer mode, Dirge of Cerberus largely failed to stick the landing with critics and fans alike, contributing to the public perception that the compilation of Final Fantasy VII was more of an complication. But for fans of a certain age, Dirge of Cerberus was probably one of the coolest things ever made back in 2006. That's because it was. I'll show it was not your thing though, then perhaps this next Type O Final Fantasy might suit you better. Final Fantasy Type 0, released in 2011 on the PSP, garnered some hype prior to its Western release. It received a near-perfect score from Famitsu in Japan, and those who imported it also had incredibly positive things to say. But not many people have much to say about it these days at all, really. Set in the land of Orients, Type 0 is an action RPG and a gritty war story that doesn't hesitate to show you how gruesome it can get. It's the first Final Fantasy game to be rated M in the West, and for good reason. Type 0 also features an ensemble cast of protagonists who make up a group of elite cadets known as Class 0. Yes, in between being sent out on dangerous missions, these students also have to juggle classes and training at their academy. The game's combat is relatively simple. It's an action RPG with basic attacks, skills and magic, with 3 characters taking the field at a time. Type 0's twist is its break sight and kill sight mechanics, which deal massive damage or outright kill enemies when you attack at the right time. On paper, Final Fantasy Type 0 is a compelling game. What went wrong when it finally came west as Final Fantasy Type 0 HD then? Well, for starters, the story ultimately bogged itself down with questionable dialogue and an overemphasis on convoluted mythological elements, which means it didn't make much sense. On the technical side of things, Type 0 HD is a mixed bag as well. Not helping matters was the fact that the game launched with some of the most aggressive motion blur you'll ever see in a video game, necessitating a patch to tone it down. Despite these shortcomings, Type 0 was a game full of potential, and a sequel could have been amazing if given the chance. The HD remaster even had a secret cutscene teasing a new game. Sadly, because director Hajime Tabata departed Square Enix in 2018, the odds of Type 0 seeing a follow-up are close to 0. Right then, next up, a handheld spin-off that I somehow didn't hear about until relatively recently, and not just because it's Final Fantasy XII. I do need to replay Final Fantasy XII, honestly. It's been a while. While other direct sequels to existing Final Fantasy games often released on the same platforms as the originals, Final Fantasy XII Revenant Wings stands out due to being a DS exclusive. Released in 2007, this direct sequel trades Final Fantasy XII's more grounded story of political intrigue for something more fantastical, and in the process makes Vaughn the true main protagonist. Finally. Revenant Wings also swapped out 12's battle system for a touchscreen focused RTS game. Moving and commanding characters is all done with the DS stylus, and combat now features a rock paper scissors system where melee units beat ranged units beat flying units, and flying units beat melee units. More importantly, Final Fantasy's classic staple of summoned monsters is given far more prominence here, as characters can summon a large amount of espers to fill out their team. And while mainline Final Fantasy games feature a smaller pool of iconic summons, Revenant Wings instead features dozens of different espers to call upon, making them a central part of the combat system. Though fan reception is a touch more lukewarm than critics, Revenant Wings is a solid game overall, one that sadly missed its chance at a revitalization since it wasn't included with Final Fantasy XII's Zodiac Age remaster. We're going to start a quest to get this one ported. Final Fantasy may be one of the role-playing titans today, but back in 1992, JRPGs didn't have nearly as strong of a foothold. To even get some games and series in the West, developers often made changes to make their games more palatable for the Western audiences at the time. Final Fantasy IV, for example, was made easier in its SNES releases. Final Fantasy Mystic Quest took things one step further, being an entire game made specifically for Western audiences. Released in 1992, Mystic Quest was a simple and easy RPG meant to appeal to younger players, and it did so by heavily streamlining virtually everything the genre is known for and why someone would want to play Final Fantasy in the first place. Cool. Throughout the entire game, the protagonist, the mundanely named Benjamin, is accompanied by one of 4 allies. Random encounters are also completely eliminated, as is the world map, which is reduced to linear paths between major areas. And if the player fails in the game's rather easy turn-based battles, they can simply retry on the spot, rather than being kicked back to the title screen. In the end, Square's efforts with Mystic Quest backfired, as the game failed to leave a lasting mark on Final Fantasy history. Those who played it all agreed that the game went too far in oversimplifying its mechanics and story, though the music was still good. To further the irony, Final Fantasy VI made its debut only 2 years later, and given its enduring legacy as one of the greatest games of all time, it did a much better job at pulling in newcomers to the role-playing genre. Right, next genre, Outro Gang genre. Outro Gang, you cool boarders 1 and 2. It's good to see you. How did you enjoy that? Do you want more Final Fantasy content on the channel? I would personally really love to, ironically, do a re-review of The Spirits Within, because I haven't watched it in about 15-20 years, and it made me cry last time. So we'll see if it still does the trick. Also, I'd like to do a playthrough of Final Fantasy 12 at some point, because I hate it. I can't remember why. So, if that interests you, drop down in the comments down below and let me know. I've been Jimmy for Vultures. Been good having you, and see you next time. You're too far away now. I got...